Thank you, Rosa. Okay, so let's get the meeting started. We've got our field trip today. Hope everybody was able to grab their dinner boxes. And let's get started. So the first item is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Agenda.
Second, Bernie. Any discussion? Any opposition to the motion, the agenda being approved? Okay, that passes. I'm going to hand it over to Ally for future board items and tours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ally Rhodes, Director of Parks and Recreation. I'm going to be super brief so you all can focus on your retreat, but I don't think you all have met our Urban Park Senior Manager, Denise Dawson. She's joining us for the tour. So first wanted to introduce the new face in the room. We're so happy she joined our team in early June and has jumped right in. She is been a great fit. You'll hear from more from her on certain future opportunities. On your future board items, the one thing I want to call out for you is that September 12th is when City Council has their first conversation about the city manager's recommended 2025 budget. That will be published later this week, and we can forward that to you when that goes live. There are no changes from the budget that you all look at, other than there's some changes in funding sources to support a complete development at Primos Park, which includes the underpass and a transportation bridge. So stay tuned. We'll give you an update on that at your September meeting. They are set to discuss and approve the budget at first and second hearings in October. With that, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that from the board? Okay, there's no public participation this evening. And now the next item is the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, updates from the Director of Parks and Rec, and then planning and design and construction update. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello, I'm sorry I didn't say hi to you earlier.
Second.
Barney, second. Any discussion, amendments? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda, including the minutes from the July 22nd, 2024 meeting are approved. So Rosie, you can send those to me for signature. Thank you. And then the next item is matters from the board. We have our study session planning to discuss. We have a letter from Mayor Brockett and Nicole Spear, the Mayor Pro Tem, in response to our letter to council. And then we also have any PrAP matters that folks want to raise. But let's start with the PrAP study session planning. Anybody like to raise any topics related to that?
I can kick it off.
Okay.
So at our last meeting, we decided that Jenny and I would kind of lead the planning for the study session. It's been a great opportunity to work closely with Jenny. It's been fun to do that with you. Thank you for your time and engagement. We polled and asked what topics you all were interested in studying in our upcoming study session. And what we learned was that there's a lot of topics that we're all interested in, more than we can tackle in one meeting. So we'll get into this in a little bit greater detail in a moment, but basically what we'd like to propose is that we tackle two topics at the study session. We're going to make two recommendations. Well, we're going to make 3 recommendations, pick 2. And then we'd like to consider taking more time in regular meetings to study topics in greater depth, which I think it is definitely a different way to do our agenda, but I think given this board's level of interest and engagement in specific topics, I think it could be very productive for us. Okay. Did I miss anything in that, Jen?
No.
Okay, so let me just off my list here. And again, thank you everybody who suggested topics to us. Again, there were a lot. I'm going to talk about engagement. Engagement with the public, I think it's an important topic. We see it all the time. We've seen it throughout my time on the board. We saw it today, the discussion of tennis courts. I think it's an area where we we benefit from having a more specific POV on how we're going to engage the public when and what channels, how we're going to have staff support on that. And there's some lessons to be learned from other boards on that. So I think that's a good topic. Great. For the other two, Jenny's going to give us the choice.
Yes. So just to recognize everyone's contribution to this study session, at the end, when we were looking at all the topics, we had public engagement, like Bernie said. Then we have, we included PPPs, public-private partnerships and fundraising is one. Camping on parks and rec land, the South Boulder parks, bathrooms at parks. And youth. And that was all of the topics that we received. So as Bernie said, we've decided to go with two, public engagement being one. And then the other two that we were looking at to focus on for this study session is public, potentially PPPs and fundraising. That we included together, but fundraising falls within really the Play Boulder Foundation, and they're coming in September to do a presentation for us. So we were thinking we would take fundraising as a whole out and potentially just focus on our opportunities to work with public and private partnerships as a whole, or focus on youth topics. So we would be looking at taking fundraising out for September and then focusing on public-private partnerships or youth. Youth would be like youth programming, how we market to the youth sports, how they're engaged in city services and things like that. And then public-private partnerships would be, as an example, like the Coot Lake Dog Art Memorial that's out there, and how we can help kind of grassroots organizations potentially work with the city through public and private partnerships. And that's one example of how we can potentially engage nonprofits or public with the city. So we'd like to know more about what the city's already doing as far as public-private partnerships goes, because I think that exists. We just don't know what it is. So that would kind of be that role in that study session. And then for youth, we'd be looking for the department to tell us more about kind of other cities and how their youth programming works, and what we're doing now and how we potentially do it better. So, and then the camping, the bathrooms, and South Boulder Parks will all come in later. So the question for the board tonight would be, would you rather focus on public-private partnerships or youth programming overall? In addition to public engagement. Any suggestions?
Thank you so much for your engagement on this. I mean, that's really very clear and it represents or reflects just a lot of thoughtful discussion. So thank you both for doing that. I'd open it up to discussion from the board members who are present about the proposed topics. Anybody want to chime in, thoughts?
I'm curious if we could look at the intersection between public-private partnerships and youth programs.
Okay,
Because I feel like kind of need one for the other.
you do. And that is part of the conversation that Bernie and I had is there's a lot of services, a lot of nonprofits that are in place for youth that are difficult for them to sign, right? Because there's no real central location in general for kids to congregate, I guess. So public-private partnerships could also really lend into almost every topic that we have, right? It could lend into camping, it could lend into bathrooms and things like that. I mean, maybe Allie can tell us what she thinks about those two topics and if we should include public-private partnerships with fundraising, like with Play, or if we should bring it out separately, and then youth, what do you think?
I think you made a good call, given that Benji is coming to present to the board about, and you saw in your consent agenda an overview of the updated MOU that actually addresses not only their fundraising goals, but it also addresses their opportunity to serve as a backbone for organizations like the Coot Lake group that one or others. So, and to your point, it isn't a function of the board to fundraise. So I do think it's appropriate that get pulled out, but that you be aware of what's going on with Play so that you can advocate and be supporters. So perhaps if you have questions after that, that's something that, like the others, could go in the pipeline of follow-ups. But as a matter for study, I think you made the right call. As far as youth, Sunny also nailed it. There is very much happening for youth in our city, and the city does not provide it directly. We're a facilitator. It happens across our fields and our facilities and our pools. But we're not doing it alone. We're a facilitator. And so those topics are very closely related. And so you could start with those two. And I like the way you laid it out. We could give you the lay of the land. Here's what's happening. Here's how it's guided for engagement. Here's the city's engagement framework. And I'm thinking like 10 to 15-minute presentations so that then you can spend the bulk of your time studying and discussing the issue. But for both, that's been the framework in the past. We give an overview of, here's what the current state is. Here's what the BPR plan says, which is our guiding light. And then you can have a conversation.
Okay, so youth.
And in giving you the lay of the land, we would talk a lot about the public-private partnerships that are not covered.
Eric, what do you think? You look thoughtful.
I think the public engagement piece is good because I've been sort of confused about how we are supposed to respond to emails that we get. And as somebody who also writes city council members, I do appreciate a response. And I think that this board needs to have some protocols in place on who's going to respond. Because there's nothing worse than taking the public, writes us, they tell us their concerns, and then there's no response. And I think we owe them, we need to have some protocols in place. One of us should respond. It doesn't have to be, very opinionated. It can just be, if you received this, thank you very much. But I think that needs to be spelled out because I think it's great that people take the time and tell us what their concerns are. That's what we want. But we also need to be receptive as a board to say, thank you very much. We acknowledge your receipt of this. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to take action on it. But so I think that's really good because I've been struggling with that a little bit. And then I'm a little worried about the other ones being very overly broad, that because I want to get as much out of this study session as we can. And I feel like some of those topics are a little like youth and seems very broad, and I just feel like to get our most out of this time, we kind of need to focus in, either have some questions or focus on the age group or that's kind of where I'm at. So.
Do you think that, I defer to Elliot and Bernie on this, but do you think that if we decide to do youth and public engagement, would then those two topics come to the board and we would have specific sub questions that we want the city to focus on? Or do we just kind of let them present?
So,
Do we narrow it down for the city?
from my perspective, we want to be as specific as possible in what we're asking the city to present in terms of information to us.
Mhm.
So, for example, in the past, we had a lot of questions about public safety and what is the department spending and doing related to public safety? Like talk about the Urban Ranger program, talk about other initiatives, and actually talk about like the dollars that are going out the door to actually cover public safety and awareness issues. And they then presented us with very specific information on like, what does the department do in this area? And yes, it could have been more narrow, but like that was a pretty specific ask. So if we're gonna do if we're gonna ask staff to do something for us, we want to make sure that it's as tailored to what we want to hear as possible.
Okay.
And they can provide us with, you guys have a treasure trove of info and got people that can present to us. But we want to make sure that we've got the right people that are committed to come, right? We don't have like 5 staff members who are just on call. We have like 1 or 2 members at the most who can present to us. If there's specific budget information we want to hear, if there is usage information we want to hear, what I'm interested in is like, if we're going to talk about youth services, what are some gaps that we're seeing in coverage? And how can those be filled through opportunities through public-private partnerships? Is it just a money issue? What are those, how do those gaps connect to our plan? The things that we want to do as a department and as a city, what are the things that we could do better on that really matter to the things that we've said are priorities. So, I ask you if you want to add anything to that in terms of staff request.
I think you nailed it. I'd look to Scott to see if you think for the youth one specifically, and obviously we would loop in other things from planning, but I think as it relates to youth, I think that's very good direction and we
And we have initiatives on our 2022 PPR plan that directly address teen programming and youth programming. And so I think it's a perfect opportunity to hit some of those gaps that you referred to and discuss on how the private public partnerships could impact that.
I'd be specifically curious to know what are the hindrances? Like, what are the reasons why there aren't more?
Yeah, should we lose a partner? Like, is there somebody who did a swimming program who isn't doing it anymore and now we can't offer swim lessons? Something like, where we can
A
weigh in
current
on
state
it.
assessment is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Like, what's the current state, what's working well, what isn't? And it's to Scott's point, this is a robust area of study in the 2022 plan, and work has happened since then, and work is planned.
And just that this is a town with so many resources. What is stopping people from partnering with Parks and Rec? Why are they not reaching out to you? Are you not reaching out to them saying we have a need that needs filled? Or you're not seeing the need that needs filled, but I want to know why there isn't more
Well, and-
partnership. Like, what is the hindrance? What is the hurdle to that happening?
And so
If
maybe
there
like
is
a
any.
list of all the partnerships that exist, and then you could share what you see as a gap.
I would say that I'm also interested just hearing the state assessment of these was separate from the partnership.
Yep.
Conversation. I'm also interested in knowing like what we're doing, how is it similar to or different from what happens surrounding?
Yeah, I think I've heard you say a few times, Valley, that Boulder in general relies on these partnerships more than other cities. And I guess my question is why can't Park and Rec fill that role a little bit more on our own if we put some resources into that? I mean, on the way over here, I was talking to a friend about the gymnastics classes. They love them, but they fill up like this, right? And so there's definitely a need there. Gymnastics is something that we provide on our own, right? There's no partner there. And, I guess I'm used to coming from communities that where Park and Rec took a more direct role in sort of the programming, either it's basketball or it's kickball or whatever it is. And then I'm kind of interested in where are the gaps right now? So we could do this sort of assessment and say, here's our partners on these and, here are the gaps and.
Yeah, and where are services that fill up really easily and fast and like,
Swimming lessons, another
Yeah.
example, like it's very hard to get swimming lessons in this town.
So I,
Part of it, Ally, is like, to the extent possible, I'd love to know role assessment of like how parks programming fits in with other programs that are offered in the city, like the privatized youth soccer and that kind of stuff.
we have that both from, again, the 22 plan is where we zoom out and take a 5 to 10 year look at the system. You all aren't asking for new work, which is
Right.
great. It would be, let us talk to you about that work and what we heard from the community, including we had specific stakeholder meetings with, and so without getting too much into the content, because we can do that at the study session, I hear your questions. If there's others that would be helpful, it'd be great to have a similar conversation about the engagement. What are your questions? What would be helpful for us to share in advance of your conversation? That one feels fuzzy.
and I think that just as an overlay to what you just said, I think the foundation of the presentation would be what have we sought to do through our strategic planning process? Where are we now? We know that the master plan emphasizes youth engagement. We have this plan in place where we're trying to do these things. What does it look like 2 years later? And where are some areas of opportunity? And what are some ideas that we have? And then we can talk about those things and engage.
Great. The engagement one is fuzzy. I heard Eric say he'd love to know as a board member, how do you engage with the community? Could you share more about what you're hoping to discuss there? What background would be helpful from staff?
I think Eric actually described it pretty well. It's like we should have clearly established. Sorry,
You're fine.
latest per usual, you get everything. We should have clearly established roles for when we receive a letter like the one that we got this morning. So we all know, like, okay, like I can read this and mark it read and Kelly's gonna send a response or Eric's gonna send a response or whatever. But I think it's also worth our time to discuss amongst ourselves, like, how do we want to present ourselves to the public? Like, are we just like, are an organ that receives comments, or do we want to get feedback? We want to help the public see different perspectives on it, or do we just want to receive input and leave it tally and call it a day?
Right.
Uh,
And beyond just the emails we get, are there other ways to engage with people in the city and what are the appropriate kind of, what are the things that we can do as board members? What are appropriate things for us to do or say?
When should we get coffee with someone? When would that not be appropriate? And that's maybe more of an internal discussion.
Yeah, and that's more of like, I think would be based on the,
When you say internal, do you mean amongst the board members or?
Yes, amongst us with your.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it would be, it sounds to me like it would be a board specific discussion that's grounded in the handbook.
Right.
And if we need to like amend the handbook in some way, or if we need to talk about like practices or protocols, I don't think this would be a staff driven portion of the meeting. You might be able to provide some historic context for how the board is engaged.
I was gonna say, would it be helpful to have, when you talked about what you can and can't do, some of it is governed by the charter. But there's an attorney on the board, and I think you probably feel comfortable representing that, and if not, I'm also.
Yep.
Comfortable with it.
But I think what would be helpful is maybe some background from you on what other boards do. Like, what does the planning board do when they get letters? Like,
Yeah, it's similar and different. Their role is so different because they're a quasi judicial board who, you know, makes land use decisions and other decisions. But yes, we can share some of that.
And yeah, there are boards that are more recognized.
We hold stakeholder and we convene working at the board member. Can I do that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I would like to know, like, if there's a topic, you know, that comes up and we want to get input from the community. How do we do that?
yeah, and I think like, okay, here's one operational question that I would love to discuss, Holly, is like, city council has hotline, they're somehow able to email each other without violating open meeting laws, like, how do we get to do that? How do I get to send these type of little email at once without breaking the law?
You can't, right?
Not
Not
personally,
right
now, not currently, yeah,
We don't have the technology.
but it has to exist.
Yeah.
We-
That's the whole other
We-
thing. You know, the collaboration piece, I feel like is really missing among the board because I'm so scared to send an email, you know, like, you know, and I don't think it's really, that's why we were here. That's why we were elected to this office. They want us to collaborate. We just need to find better.
Yeah, and I think it might be helpful as part of that discussion to go over just like the nuts and bolts of like what the law requires us to do and not do, and then we can, you know, just be clear about kind of where the boundaries are and where we have room, because like the open meetings law is not going to change.
Right.
But
should.
we might be able to glean best practices from other committees or boards about like how they engage with each other.
But the study session, now that's not an open meeting, is that correct?
It is a meeting.
It is a meeting.
It's just not,
Is it an open meeting?
This is recorded. This
Right.
link is available
Yeah.
right now. Any community member, should they
Right.
choose, would be able to be a part
Okay.
of this.
And we
Same
did
with the
that last
tour.
year.
It's been, so
Yeah.
anytime you all meet,
Right.
one and two of you, it's publicly known, it's
Okay.
publicly available.
So our study session essentially is open study. session.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there won't be, there typically is not public comments.
Okay.
People would be
So there
observers.
would be a,
the word, like last year during this exact meeting, we had people from the public who followed us around on a
Right.
field trip.
Okay.
Which was actually pretty interesting. It was cool. But our study session, while not a typical meeting, is still a meeting for the
Yeah.
purposes of the Open Meetings Act. It just isn't, it's more restricted in terms of public participation.
okay.
So, but yeah, I think that's a great topic of
That
discussion.
was super helpful.
I'm supportive of open meetings and I think everything should be transparent. I'm not trying to hide anything, but I think we need to still find a way to not get cumbered by that, I guess. as much.
Yeah, and I think that's worth the discussion. I mean, we can't just throw our hands up and say, well, you know, we can't talk to each other, so that's it, right? We should talk about ways to collaborate. And we should talk about ways to engage with the public more, as much as we can, and what the protocols around that are. I
Yeah.
think that's a great idea.
What if, you know, how there's a, so the city council has a hotline? Did you just say that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was.
Thank you for that discussion. That was super helpful. When you said public engagement, that is not where my head went, and so you just clarified it. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I want to move us along. It sounds like we, if I'm hearing things correctly, we want to hear about engagement and youth services over public-private partnerships, but the youth services discussion can encompass and incorporate some public-private partnership
If you
discussion.
wouldn't mind just giving like an overview of how the city comes to those partnerships.
So here's what I would recommend as next steps. Bernie and Jenny, a team of two, can meet and talk to each other, and I can meet with them. We can create an outline of what we think we would prepare in advance and run it by you too. You've heard this same conversation. You have the ability to talk to your board members and see is that spot on. So we can get you that outline. And then you can truth check it. In fact, we could even bring it to the September meeting because you have another meeting between now and your retreat. So we could bring the outline of what we're going to present and you all could say, yep, check, you heard us. That would be helpful.
Great, sounds good.
The next item on the agenda for this particular item is the response from Mayor Brockett and Mayor Pro Tem Spear to our letter. I've read the letter and I don't know if it's worth discussing much about the letter, but I'm happy to open it up for discussion here today. If anybody has some thoughts they want to share about what the letter said.
I was just saying it was, we put a lot of energy into talking to the city council about universal swim, which I think is a good and noble cause. I understand the city council has a lot on their plate, and I think that they need some judicious choices.
Yeah, anybody else? I would echo that. I thought that it struck me as a form letter that could have been sent to any board or commission. And I appreciate the content of the letter tremendously, and I know council is working really hard on a variety of topics. Those are my thoughts on that, so. Okay, any matters from the board before we go on our field trip? My matter from the board is I'm excited about the field trip. So,
I did float the Boulder Creek about a week or two ago. I appreciate the signage. This was very safe. I could take the kids. There was a lot of usage of the creek. You don't really realize how many people are in the creek till you float it on Sunday. And you're like, it's like, unfortunately, there was also a lot of trash on the sides. And so I don't know if there's creek cleanups, but that might be something I'd be willing to help shepherd because it is a little bit sad looking at the trash on the sides.
who's responsible for cleaning trash in the creek?
There's multiple teams that support, so. The Safe and Managed Public Spaces team does as much as they can. Our team does as much as we can.
Is there a community cleanup of that? Is that something?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
It's been challenging because there have been hazardous conditions with the creek, but I have a meeting next week with the volunteer collaborative to talk about, we have several groups that have said, let us help.
Like hazardous in terms of
Human waste and
the waste.
syringes.
Yeah.
It is much better.
Yeah.
I don't, it's tricky. We're working on it. I'd love to be able to welcome community help on that. The other thing we can do, I was just thinking that made me think, we did do at the November 22 retreat, gave an overview on the Safe and Managed Public Spaces program and everything that the city does to try and both support people who are in very vulnerable circumstances and living outside, as well as keep our public spaces safe and clean. And I could send that, Jenny and Bernie, if you want to see what previous presentations have looked like, just as you think about, or just the outline that you'll see.
Great, so staff has organized a really great evening for us. There's gonna be transportation for us to these various sites. And is that outside, like a van of some sort?
We've got a 15-passenger van that we use for transportation for youth recreation. Scott has offered to drive. We have teammates who some of our teammates are going to travel with us. Some are meeting us on site. Really grateful to the folks. This tour is something I think we started upon the request of Trav 4 or 5 years ago. You see the plans, you see PowerPoints, but to walk the site and get a feeling for them adds a little bit of value to the conversations coming. So we have 3 thoughts. We're going to try and keep you on schedule, both to get everyone home to their families and just make sure we're back here where we're supposed to be. So
We are right on time, so let's do it. That adjourns this portion of the meeting.
And,
Thank you.
I
thank you.
recommend a quick pit stop if anyone needs the